You're listening to the Hire Calling Podcast, your source for all things hiring, staffing, and recruiting. I'm Pete Newsome, joined by Ricky Baez once again. Ricky, how are you today?
I am doing amazing, Pete. It has been raining in such a disrespectful way here in Central Florida.
It is not sunny Florida right now and hasn't been
No,
all week, but
it's Seattle, Florida is what it is right
that's
now.
right. It's how it feels.
Yeah,
But let's talk about something that maybe can brighten some days. How about that?
that's awesome. Yes, recruiting.
Recruiting always brightens everyone's day, and especially when it's done well. That's what's most important. And one of the things that keeps recruiting from being done well at times is a high candidate drop-off rate, which
Mm.
no one likes. So today we're going to talk about how to improve your candidate drop-off rate, offer some tips, suggestions, turn that bad recruiting process around real quickly.
Pete, what is this drop off rate? Because I don't know if a recruiter is doing their job and communicating what the job is supposed to be, there should be no drop off, right?
Well, there's a few other factors that come into play. So
Okay.
why don't we start by just describing what that is? And it's basically the rate at which candidates drop from the time they first apply to a job until you've completed the recruiting process. And if that rate is high, that means you should assess how you're doing things,
Yeah.
and you probably need to make a lot of changes to your process. Maybe not a lot, maybe just one. But we want to talk about the common mistakes that are made that, if you think about it, you assess and apply a few changes, can make a big difference in your drop off rate.
And of course, I was being
Of
facetious, right?
course.
As far as the recruiter wanted to do everything, but you know what? It is a good indicator to pay attention to, right? Because there's a lot of good information in that assessment that tells you whether you're on the right track or not on the right track, right? So finding out why people drop off, and if you find out that you're able to affect or pull some levers to change that for the better, it's the powers that be are going to be much happier, and the candidate is going to have a much better experience because you fine tune the entire recruiting process to get the right candidate. So definitely a good idea to do.
And that's what it all comes down to with this, that candidate
Yeah.
experience. If it's positive, your drop off rate is going to be very low, which is the goal. If it's negative, you'll get the feedback one way or the other. And the average drop off rate is about somewhere between 10 and 20%. Now, that's still pretty high. And what
Yeah.
that means is almost everyone has opportunities to improve, some more than others. Sometimes we see really high candidate drop off rates. Now, I'm, of course, on the third party side as a staffing company. So a lot of times we have to live with our clients' process. So we often encourage them to speed it up. That's the biggest one, Ricky, that I've seen is you take too long. You have too many interviews, you don't facilitate them quickly enough, and you just drag it out. And as a someone who's done this a long time, I truly believe time is a deal killer. It kills
Mm.
deals, and it will leave you wishing you had your best candidates because they're not going to stay around if you drag out the interview process.
Yeah, no, that's right. You know, especially because look, candidates, especially these days, Pete, these days candidates have options, way more options than what they did 30 years ago. I mean, one great example that I use in class, like it's if I work for corporate America right now, Pete, and I got fired today, and I have to make a quick, easy 600 bucks this weekend legally, I go to Uber. I go to Uber Eats. I got to do all these other things, and this is what recruiters are competing with, right? That sense of independence. So yeah, if you have a drop off rate that keeps climbing, right, you want to bring that as low as possible to keep the candidate as engaged as possible. And there's a cost associated to do, right, Pete? Because the more people who apply who don't complete the process, that's money down the drain.
Well, that's right. You could waste a lot of time and effort through that,
Yeah.
and along the way, you're hurting your business. So we've talked
Yeah.
recently on a podcast about the cost of an open position, and there's real costs associated with that. So go listen to our other podcast about it. Go read our blog about it. So the cost of a vacancy is hurting your business. And if your
Yes.
drop off rate is high, what's going to keep that vacancy open longer? There's other costs, though. That one's easy to quantify, but then there's some subtle things like burnout among your team,
Ah.
right? If you have a position open and someone else is having to pick up the load, the longer they're having to do that for, The worse it's going to feel to that employee. And then you may have a double problem because if you don't fill the position fast enough, your employee who's been burdened with those tasks, they may be out the door next.
Now you got 2 positions to fill, right? And see, and I'm glad you brought that up, Pete, because this is important for a recruiter to know, because the recruiter doesn't necessarily feel that pain immediately. You know who feels that pain? The business partner, the boss, the leader of that department who is able who manages that work. So the recruiter doesn't get to see that. It's a good idea for recruiters to know that up front. That way, it's just another incentive to make sure you're taking a deeper dive into what's causing these drop off rates. So 10 to 20%, right? So I'm assuming. So what is a perfect rate besides zero? Obviously, right? So what is an acceptable rate to you?
I think as close to zero as you can get, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if you have a drop off at all, it's important to assess what happened. Sometimes it's unavoidable. If you are moving quickly, but a candidate who you are attracted to and want to try to hire for a role is already interviewing elsewhere, there
yeah,
may you may just be too late to the party. That's a reality of it. Um, but you want to assess your own actions and your time frame and compress it. Let's talk about before we get into all of the different reasons for a low drop off rate. Let's talk just a little bit further about the negative implications of it. We talked
okay.
about employee morale, right? You're creating burnout, but it's also going to hurt your brand in the market because if
Oh,
you don't treat candidates well in that interview process, they'll talk. They'll talk to other
that's
candidates.
right.
They will let them know now more than ever. I mean, spend a couple minutes on LinkedIn. You'll see that people aren't shy about sharing their
That's
opinions and
right.
experiences, good or bad.
And it's not only that, it's not only whether they get treated well or not. There's even some things that the recruiter is not necessarily involved with personally that could affect the situation. What if it's a disorganized process? What if it takes 2 hours to apply? What if the job description has no resemblance of what the real job is like?
Yes.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of things the recruiter can fix, the recruit a level the recruiter that can pull to make sure those things are off that table. Because you're right, these candidates talk, recruiters talk as well, but candidates do talk, especially the ones that are high caliber, right? Because here's the thing, the higher the caliber of the candidate, the lower the patience.
Right.
That's what I've noticed, right? I don't know if you've noticed that too.
Sure. It comes down to simple supply and demand. And the best
Yeah.
candidates are acutely aware of their value in the market. And if
Yes.
you're someone who's being, let's be honest, LeBron James understands that every team wants him to play for them. Well, at least used to, maybe not anymore.
Yeah, I used to.
Right.
Yeah,
But if
not
you're at the
anymore.
top of your game, you generally know it.
Yeah.
And so those candidates who are probably the ones that you do want the most, they're not going to have patience or tolerance for a lengthy process. So there's other reasons: poor follow up, poor communication, lack of
Yeah.
engagement from your team. So even if you think your process is moving along quickly, even if it is objectively, you have to engage with the candidate along the way. You can't
That's
leave
right.
them in the dark because they will assume the worst every time.
And Pete, it's like a relationship, right? If you know, if you're looking to call, to call out that one person to go out on a date, the first date goes well, second date goes even well. You can't go too much time without calling that person, right? Because the person's gonna think they're not interested. Then guess what? If you as a recruiter do not engage with that candidate in between the process, they are going to think the worst. They're gonna think they're not interested, and you know who they're gonna gravitate to, that one recruiting organization that does everything right, that talks to them, that keeps in contact with them, right? That's who they're going to gravitate to. So the whole idea, and I know you didn't say this, Pete, but I know the whole ideal of an organization to have this energy, to have this, and dare I say it, attitude that candidates should be happy that this opportunity exists and they should buy down to the opportunity. That was 30 years ago. These days, I think the tables have turned. Was it in The Office, or was it, Michael Scott who says, "Oh, how the turntables turn." I don't know if you've seen The Office.
Right.
Sorry, it's squirrel moment for me.
Well,
Um,
you're right. That tolerance is low, and you have to treat candidates the way you'd want to be treated. And
Of course.
that's so, but even if speed isn't possible, and we have a client who we've worked with for a long time who told us up front, our interview process takes a month. Wow, a
Mhm.
month. As a third party recruiter, your eyes glaze over when you hear a month, because you may as well say a year. But here's the reality of it. As long as we're able to communicate effectively and be consistent and
Mhm.
about what we say we're going to do, that can be okay. Now, the reality is you will lose some of the best candidates who aren't able or willing to wait a long time, but it's going to make a significant difference if you set the stage appropriately up front and say,
That's right.
Ricky, here's our process, here's how long it takes, and it's going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even 4 weeks until we realistically can get to the finish line. Are you okay with that? So people just want to be treated again the same way. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's so simple. And
It is.
ask them, ask them, are is this acceptable to you? If not, I understand. I have to
Right.
understand. But if I don't ask, or I keep my head in the sand with that, that's how I'm going to end up being disappointed and spending a lot of time on a candidate who was never going to be there by the time we made the hiring decision anyway.
I always tell all of my students, Pete, and I've said this on this program in the past. You as the best way for you to communicate the entire process to a candidate, you as a recruiter have to be the candidate's GPS. You have to lay down that map and let them know exactly what they're going to expect. Because I've been there on the candidate side. There's nothing worse than going to interview one and then you knock it out of the park. And then interview two, and then you knock that one out of the park. And you're thinking, all right, there's no more interviews. This is it. I am going to get the call. The next call is going to be that I'm hired. And then the recruiter calls me. They're excited. Ricky, guess what? Oh, am I getting the job? No, you're going to a third interview, right? It's that unexpected stuff that this organization that just leaves a bad taste in my mouth as a candidate. So yes, be the candidate's GPS. Let them know exactly what they're going to expect. Because look, nobody is going to be disappointed by a surprise when there are no
That's
surprises.
right.
They know what to expect.
That's right. No, we don't want surprises.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way to phrase
Yep.
it. And on
Yep.
that point, the last thing I'll say about setting the stage or reasons why there's often a high drop off rate is when the job description doesn't match the actual role
Ah,
that you're going to be interviewing for. And what happens if the recruiter doesn't fully understand that up front, they may screen candidates, they may pass them through to the hiring manager who is intimately aware of the details and is the one making the hiring decision. And if you're just relying on a standard job description for that, that hasn't been looked at in 5 years, 10 years, and we know those exist out there, then it may not accurately resemble the job. It may not even
right.
closely resemble the job. And that's a great way to have high candidate drop off. So always start with a thorough understanding of what the hiring need really is, then go from there. Then start accepting applications. But if you get that wrong on the front end, you're screwed from the start.
So here's a bonus pro tip. So recruiters, if a business partner comes to you and says, "Hey, I need to open a requisition for this position," you pull that job description, and that job description is 15 years old. You need to have a separate conversation about updating it. You need to. It's got to be updated before you recruit. Because if you recruit with that and you tell the candidate, that's outdated, we'll update that later. Red flag from a candidate's perspective,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Red flag. Yeah. So you might want to, it's a good idea for anything just 5 years. That's about right. Right. But 15 years ago, my Facebook wasn't invented then.
Yeah, I
Right.
even
And
5
life has
years, it
changed
can
since
be an
then.
eternity, right?
That's
Did
true
your
too. Yeah.
job description reflect your, change in working habits and working conditions? If it's hybrid, define that clearly. We see a lot of
That's right.
that. We see a remote roles post. I see this as a constant complaint anyway. We don't deal with this with our clients, of course, but because we ask the questions. That's why we don't suffer these consequences. If we see the job is remote, hopefully my team is always asking, is it fully remote? Do you ever have to come in the office? Because we'll see companies pull a fast one at times. Again, we don't work with
Mm.
these companies because it would not be a good situation at the end where they advertise a remote job, but you have to come in the office once a month, right? It's not remote. Remote's remote. I don't ever need to
It's
see you.
remote once it's remote the other times of the month,
That's right, right?
except that one
It's
time.
mostly remote. Call it hybrid. Define exactly what the expectations are on a hybrid role, and you'll hopefully receive a lot fewer applicants who aren't a good fit or who wouldn't want to stay involved in the process. So I get why you'd say, hey, a 5-year job description may still be relevant. I say start from scratch every time, at least to the point where you assess it, reconfirm, yes, this is still applicable today as it was 6 months ago when we hired for this role. The
Mhm.
world's changing pretty rapidly right now. So are needs in the workforce and in the technology world where we spend a lot of our recruiting time. Boy, it's changing almost every day right now. So don't take anything for granted when you're looking at an old job description. Assume that there's
That's right.
changes.
Agreed, 100. Now, some business leaders are like, "Wow, every time we have to," because you are gonna have some business leaders are like, "Ah, it's been 5 years. We don't have to do this every time." Invest the time and effort, folks. The time and effort you invest into making sure this is right at the beginning would yield much better sustainable results towards the end. So put in the elbow grease now. It works, trust me.
So we've talked around all the issues on why you may have a low candidate drop off. But let's make sure we get to the good part, which is what you can do about it. And the good news is most companies, most organizations can just make a few tweaks and have an entirely different outcome. So let's focus on those. So as we started, we'll talking about, we'll go back to it. Speed up your process.
That's
Speed
right.
up your process. Whatever it is today, if you're satisfied with your drop off rate, if that is something you do not consider to be a problem, no one's upset, you're hiring candidates quickly, your morale is great, you're not putting the burden of an empty job on someone else's plate while they're having to cover two roles. If you can
Mm.
look at all that and say, we're good, then you don't need to speed up your interview process. But if you can't check all of those boxes, start with the timeline, and odds are improvement there will make a big difference.
And folks, just remember, because I know what people are thinking right now. They're like, well, you know what, Ricky, we got to make sure we get it right. I get it. I understand. You want to make sure you get everything right. But here's the reality of the situation. 9 times out of 10, that candidate out there looking for a job, they need that job. They need to find something. And if you're taking your time with your process and somebody else is more efficient and is quicker, then you're done.
Right.
You're done. Do not underestimate the sense of urgency on the candidate's behalf, especially the higher caliber they are, the more choices they have, and they're not going to go with the unorganized one.
That's right.
Right.
They'll
So,
know it.
yeah, make sure of course, they will know it. You know who's not going to care? The people who don't have a shot anywhere else. They're not
It
going to care.
sounds harsh, but it's true. We have to be
It's
realistic
true.
about this. So, how can
Yeah.
you speed it up? Well, internal communication and buy off that there's a problem. Because if you don't acknowledge that, you're probably not going to be motivated to make changes. So, that's step one, getting the buy in at the top, whoever all the
Mhm.
decision makers are, to say, we need to fix this. That means your internal interview team needs to be accessible. They need to be
Mhm.
committed to it. They need to be aware that it's important. And then, you need the buy-in. That's what we're talking about
Mhm.
here. So the next thing you could do is look at what is your application process? Is it
Ugh.
confusing?
I mean,
Is it
yeah.
lengthy? What if you're losing candidates right up off the from the jump because they look at it and say, "Yeah, this is too much work. I don't want to do it."
The folks, an application process should not require an engineering degree or you to be a rocket scientist to complete it. I shouldn't have to ask a week off of work for me to complete the the application process. And look, and I think you and I have had conversations about this because in my previous job, it's over at a big call center here in Central Florida. We had an issue where 90% of the people that applied would not finish the application process, and it drove me nuts. I started looking into it. The application was an hour and a half long. 'Cause it was you had to submit a resume, you had to fill everything manually. There was a personality test, there's other tests, and there's other tests, and by the time you're done, the person it's like, "You know what? I'll just be homeless." Right? I'm done.
That's preferable.
I'm not gonna work. I'm good. Just you've got to be able to take a look at those things. And if you have an applicant tracking system right now, folks, if you don't know how to use it, find your nearest local HR, IT person. They'll show you how to pull a query. Just pull an easy, whether it's PeopleSoft, whether it's TAS, whatever the case may be. There's a query that says that shows you application completion rates. That's an important thing to take a look at, right? And if you see that, you want to make the application process as short as possible. Now, you said before, Pete, that an application should not be too easy neither, right?
Well, that's its own challenge these days,
Yeah.
is the one-click apply that's become so prevalent. If you make it
Mhm.
too easy, I'll tell you what I prefer in this is let everyone apply on the front end, but before you engage directly with a candidate, if it's a high volume role. So I tend to think of recruiting in two buckets. And now this is a very broad general statement. It's much more nuanced than this, but there's high volume positions that if you put a job posting out there, you will get hundreds or thousands of applicants. That's one thing. And there's other positions that are more niche, higher level, whatever they might be. There's a smaller candidate pool where you may struggle to get at any applicants at all. So what we're talking about here, so in that latter scenario, you want to make it as easy to apply as possible. One
That's
click's
right.
okay. If you're looking for the guy who's going to send people to Mars, right? And that engineer who can build that rocket, well, you better take anyone who's qualified and thoroughly vet them, right? You're not going to have too
Yeah.
many candidates. But
Not gonna
as you
happen.
go into the broader candidate pool, that's where where possible, I think you can let people apply initially, but then give them questions to answer to further self-select that they're qualified for the role. Because we know that people just blindly apply. If it looks close, if it has a job title, if it has a few keywords on it that cause that job description to come up in their search on LinkedIn or on Indeed, they're going to click and think, well, I have no chance. I'm going to miss 100% of the shots I don't take, right? The Wayne Gretzky quote.
Mhm.
So I may as well apply. Well, that's great for the candidate. It's a little flawed thinking, in my opinion, but that's a different show.
Yeah.
But it puts a big burden on the recruiting team, who has to sort through all of these unqualified candidates. So what I like to do is send an auto reply to those candidates to say, thank you for your application. Please confirm the following. You have this degree if it's required. You have this skill set if it's required. You're within this geographic distance if that's part of it. So there's ways to mitigate that volume and
Mhm.
take advantage of technology. That's my advice there. That's a bit of a different show, but you can take advantage of the systems and tools that you have to create more efficiency and ultimately communicate better with your candidates.
That's right. And then going back to something we said a little bit earlier, but I believe it really deserves a little bit more airtime is how many interviews. See, because you said it and you harped on it. It's minimize the time it takes to interview. Now I get it from a recruiter's perspective, from a hiring authority's perspective. You want to make sure that they meet the right people and you get the right information right there in front of you. But if you got 6 interviews, one person goes through 6. I don't know what you're gonna get out of that person, interview number 6 that you couldn't get out of interview number 3, right? So if you get into a point when you have 5, 6 interviews, either you don't have the right person or you don't have the right process. Either one of those 2 options are not good for you. So, yes, go back, make sure that you are as concise as possible. I know we talked about it, but I'm really big
Well,
on
it,
that one.
it, it sends a signal to the candidate that you're not that motivated to fill the role, and that's subtle, but candidates will feel that. We all know
Yeah.
what it's like when someone chooses. If someone tells you, "I don't have time for this," what they meant is they're not willing to prioritize that thing. And
That's
so,
right.
if you can't get another interview scheduled for a week because your internal team is too busy, what that simply means is they have different priorities. And candidates will pick up on that. So, to the point you made earlier, the bad ones will stick around, the good ones will bail because
That's right.
they don't want to be part of that. And they don't have to be, right? Not if they have a valuable skill set. So,
That's right.
communicate. internally, communicate externally, let the candidates know where they are in the process. We talked earlier about setting the stage up front, but that's not enough. You have to stay engaged with them along the way and say, all right, Ricky, great job interviewing today. Here's the next step. Always follow up with that and then put a time frame on it. And if you can't commit to doing that, that's when you have to look internally and be a little more introspective and say, why can't I commit to it? Why can't I give you
Yeah,
a time
that's right.
frame on that follow up? Well, let's go back to priorities. It's because your organization hasn't deemed that important enough. So all of this improvement has to start with the realization that there's a problem and that there's something you can do about it.
There's a part in the hiring process that I like to call the dead period, right? There's a period of time where it's crucial to become in mind.
I
That
never do
scared me
that,
actually.
but the dead
I never
period.
do that. Actually, I was not expecting it. So yeah, there's a dead period, and the dead period is after the candidate accepts the offer and before they start new employee orientation, which is at least 2 weeks. Folks, this is the time when you have to engage with them the most. Okay, do not forget about them. If you make them an offer and they accept it and you don't talk to them again for 14 days, you are increasing the chances of you to being ghosted a new employee orientation. That's the dead period. Do not forget about them. Reach out to them. Let them know what they can expect. Send them some videos about the organization. Here's what Darden Restaurant did to me when I started working with them many years ago. And that dead period, now first of all, they interviewed me like 5 times. That's where I got my idea. But after each interview, they gave me a $50 gift card to the Olive Garden, right? Each and every time I had like $300 worth, right? And, and I told them at the
That's
end
where
of
you're
every
okay with the multiple interviews. You're
20, I
getting
don't
paid.
care. It's 20 interviews, right? But I told the hiring authority at the end, I'm like, look, I got all these gift cards. So depending on what you tell me, either I'm going to use it to celebrate my new job or cry in my sorrows. Either way, I'm going to the Olive Garden.
Oh, well, but that's such an important thing. If they're going to have a drawn out interview process, they're making you feel better about it. Employer branding is a huge component of this. You
Yeah,
want to keep that high. So even if it, like you said, it doesn't work out for you, you have a positive recollection of that, and you're going to speak well
yeah.
of that organization. And the other thing that they're doing, which I'm glad you brought it up for this reason, is that we see a lot of companies wanting candidates to jump through hoops to do projects, to do assignments. Sometimes they're lengthy. If you're going to ask for someone's professional time, you should compensate them for them.
Pay them.
Yeah, for it.
I mean,
That's it. Pay
I
them.
mean, I got paid in food, but I
They
mean,
get paid in food, but you know what? That's meaningful. It's meaningful. Those are real dollars, and that's go into their restaurants. That's a great thing to do.
and here's the part that I really loved, right? In that dead period, they sent me a questionnaire to see what I like, what I didn't like. That way, for new employee orientation, they have my Reese's peanut butter cups there waiting, my Diet Coke waiting. They sent me glasses to my house. They were courting me, man. I felt like they were asking for a date after I kept telling them no. But that's how you do it. That is how you keep people engaged. And Pete, that was 12 years ago. 12 years later, I'm still talking about it. So what does that tell you?
What a perfect example, right? And
That's right.
this is a top employer, a great organization,
Mhm.
and no surprise that they're doing things like that. So good
That's right.
lesson for others. So I think we've covered the ground that we needed to cover here, Ricky. But let's just recap the best practices because as always, when we talk, we don't necessarily stay in a straight line with our
What?
conversations. I know it's hard to
Not
believe.
us.
So best practices to avoid a candidate drop off. Let's go one at a time. We'll trade. About the first one, speed up your interview process. Right? Don't let it drag out. That's my first one. What's next?
Communicate, 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 over communicate. Tell them, make them say, okay, Ricky, I got it. I know what's going to happen next, right? You will have so much better results if you over communicate, whereas the exact opposite, if you under communicate a little bit, that could create a big issue for your branding.
Next one, take advantage of technology. The tools that you've paid for, make sure you're using them. That will help you increase efficiency and it will also help you stay in touch with candidates, help your engagement and communication along the way. So leverage your technology.
Here's a pro tip. So now we've been talking about the people who got the job, right? What's your communication for the people who didn't get the
Ah,
job,
yes.
right? Your final three. What are you going to do with those two people who didn't get the job? Here's what you do. If you got three final candidates for one job and one person got it, obviously that one person, the employee, you're not responsible for making those other two people who didn't get the job and make them marketing ambassadors for your organization. That's what you're responsible. And what does that mean? That means that you treat them so well that when they go home at night and they're having dinner with a significant other, like, did you get that job? No, but let me tell you, I'm going back because I didn't get it. And here's how they treated me if I didn't get the job. Could you imagine how they treat employees? It sends a message about who you are as an organization. Don't skimp on that part.
No. Um, Pay attention to your employer brand. That's a big
Ooh,
one. That is something that organizations need to do. Social media being what it is, the word will get out. And it's a lot faster and easier for the word to get out today than it was in the pre social media days. So if you haven't changed your approach there, and as we talked about earlier, if you still think you hold all the cards in this process, you need to update your thinking. You need to catch up to modern times and then act accordingly.
that's right. Right. Is that
You have
it?
any
Do,
others? Well, I
do
have one
we?
more, and this is
Oh,
probably the most important thing that I could speak to on the topic of a company and improving their candidate drop off
uh huh.
is commit to it as an organization. So what I mean by that
Ah,
is, as I said
I
earlier,
know
but
you.
it's worth restating, acknowledge that you have a problem. That is step one. Commit to solving that problem, which, as hopefully we've done a good job of explaining today, there aren't that many changes. They're relatively minor changes. They're significant in the impact they'll have, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel to do this. And then make sure everyone in the organization who's involved has bought in. Even
Mm,
if they don't want to, they need to act as if they're bought in, because otherwise you're going to lose candidates you want, and it's just going to end up with a bad outcome at the end. So, a lot of things you can do. Most of them are minor. The impact from each of them can be huge.
that's right. And again, that last one is crucial because one of the things that I worried about the most is going out there, recruiting, and then selling the idea of coming to work only to bring them in, and that's not reflected back at the office, and now I'm looked like a liar, right? so so that thing he's popping up. Sorry.
Yeah.
For those of you not watching, there's this little things I bring up. Boy, it's 2023. I bring up a thumbs up and there's AI, all kinds of little cartoons on the screen. Wait till you see the video. It's actually
That's
pretty
what I
cool.
was thinking. AI is taking over even when you don't want it to. So
But
little
Pete, it's
graphics popping up.
2023. I'm thinking we're already have flying cars. No, we don't have that, but we got little emojis
We
on
have
Zoom
cartoon
calls, right?
emojis that pop up, and we don't know how to turn them off. That's perfect. Well, if you've listened this far,
Oh,
hopefully you enjoyed Ricky's cartoon emoji that just popped up. If not, and you're listening, this is a great reason. Oh, perfect. More now you have glitter
now I got
falling.
confetti all over.
Great. Well,
I love
perfect
this.
reason, an excuse to go on YouTube and watch the video there, or go to our website, fourcornerresources.com, and navigate to our blog section. You can see the video. And if you have questions, as always, email us, hire calling, HIRE, calling at fourcornerresources.com. We'd love your input and a suggestion for topics. So, Ricky, I think that's it.
I think that's it. We are able to end this without a famous phrase, and I'm not gonna say it.
Nope. Yeah.
Let's just say
You have
goodnight.
to listen to other
We're
ones
good.
to go see that. So, goodbye for now. Thanks for listening.
Have a good one. Bye.